Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Simple Living High Thinking, where we unpack Tukaram Prabhu's Bhagavad Gita class from every Friday night. And we are actually kind of catching up on, we're one class behind, so we're going to kind of combine the last two classes in today's episode. So we are in the middle of chapter 4. Varangi or Tadeo, would you like to give some context, a little bit of context on where we're at?
Yes, I'll expand on what we are trying to do here with the two classes, and then Varangi can start talking. So we covered up to text 19 in the past recording when, when we missed you, Kim. And that's 19 through 23 is still part of that 2 Fridays ago. Starting on 23 was this past Friday. So we're going to go back to verse 19, chapter 4, text 19, and cover it through 22. And that is part of 2 Fridays ago. And then starting on 23 is this past Friday. So text 19 says, one is understood to be in full knowledge, whose every endeavor is devoid of desire for sense gratification. He is said by sages, in other words, very intelligent and wise people, right? Those are the sages. He is said by sages to be a worker for whom the reactions of work have been burned up by the fire of perfect knowledge. Then text 20, abandoning all attachment to the results of his activities, ever satisfied and independent, he performs no fruitive actions, although engaged in all kinds of undertaking. Text 21, such a man of understanding acts with mind and intelligence perfectly controlled, gives up all sense of proprietorship over his possessions, and acts only for the bare necessities of life. Thus working, he is not affected by sinful reactions. Text 22, he who is satisfied with gain which comes of its own accord, who is free from duality and does not envy, who is steady in both success and failure, is never entangled, although performing actions. So that's the end of 22, and that's where we are catching up to. So Varangi, would you like to start unpacking these verses?
Sure. So thank you for such a nice reading. It's really helpful actually to read through the text together. It gives you more of a sense of continuity,
Yeah.
and the flow of Krishna's expert teachings, I guess, or his speech.
Right.
But if you recall from last episode, we went over what action entailed and the intricacies of action and how it's broken up according to the master of knowledge, Sri Krishna. And so in this chunk, he's now going into more detail, springing off of that explanation or definition of those terms. And so for 19, we see how Krishna starts to harmonize 3 different terms that have been brought up previously. And so those 3 terms are Gyan, which is knowledge, karma, which is action, and sacrifice, yagya. He starts defining or explaining what that person looks like, what he acts like, what he thinks like. And so he says one is understood to be in full knowledge, meaning like actually advanced, right? Whose every endeavor is devoid of desire for sense gratification. So for which that person acts, but that action is not driven by a selfish or materialistic desire or focus. And he said by the sages, by people that are even more advanced than him, to be a worker for whom the reactions of work have been burnt up by the fire of perfect knowledge. So here we see how this person is still engaged, right, in the world. So that's the part of karma. And although he's working in this world, because he's not doing that work for a selfish motive or for his own sense gratification, then their reactions to that work does not entangle him. What that means is that the reaction that he gets is not going to get him more materialistic or make him more materialistic. And so that's the gyan part of it, the knowledge, knowing that, hey, I'm doing this work, but I'm not entitled to the results. So I'm just going to do my work out of duty and know that it's not for my own gratification. And so that's the gyan, the knowledge, the intelligence part of it. And then here, the part of sacrifice or yagya comes in which it's such a beautiful way in which Krishna explains this, that the reactions, so we can think of it as like little strings. For every action, there is a reaction, right? And the string is that either the good or bad karma or entangling, or actually something that provides freedom from materialism. So we can picture that as a string that connects karma to that reaction. And here Krishna is saying, actually, for somebody that acts with knowledge and without detachment, the reactions of that work that he's doing in this world are already burnt up by the fire or the yagya, the sacrifice of cultivating perfect knowledge, right? So we see the start of the harmonization of these three terms that Krishna has mentioned. And so then we moved on to text 20, and then he says, abandoning all attachment to the results of his activities, ever satisfied and independent, he performs no fruitive action, although engaged in all kinds of undertakings. And so we start seeing what that person looks like internally. So externally, we see in verse 19 that he's acting in the world, right? But in 20, we see more of an insider view or vision about how he's really not attached, and he feels satisfied and independent, which I think it's something we should talk about, because independence is something maybe not like in materialism, that's something that everybody wants to achieve. But in spirituality, it's like one of those words that's like, like we don't want to be too independent either. So maybe we can flesh that out if either one of you guys want to go into that. And then he performs no fruitive action. So his action doesn't cause any entanglement, although he's engaged in all kinds of actions, right? So we see here how Krishna is developing or fleshing out this terminology. I guess, yeah, let's stop here before we move on. Any comments or?
I have a question. You comment on the word independent, and that we devotees don't really like that from a spiritual perspective, because we always want to be dependent on Krishna due to our intense love for him, and which contrasts from material appraisal of this independence meaning, right? We want to be independent when we are in material life. That's what we fight for freedom and independence, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have actually never given any thoughts to this, so I'm actually curious. That's my question to you. I want to know, like, what does that mean to a devotee that does not want to be independent, because we like to be dependent on Krishna for everything, but at the same time, this verse is stating that a person who is acting with this knowledge you just described does feel satisfied and independent. So to me, it's a bit of a paradox to put those things together. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, actually, when I brought up the independence, it's because I was going to ask you guys the same question. I can answer it, or if Kim has, do you want to go for it?
I have a very basic understanding. I don't have the knowledge that you guys have. To me, I was similarly engrossed in the whole concept of, oh, I'm not supposed to be independent. And to me, the independence is independence from the material world, where independence from Krishna, like you said today, is not the desired state. And so true independence is like faith in Krishna's mercy and faith in Krishna's grace. And going all in on that. So that's just my basic understanding.
It's so amazing, but I think a lot of times the pitfall of a lot of us that come into spirituality after being like super expert materialists is that we tend to think that spirituality has to be overthought, and it can be like basic and practical and just simple, right? Or we think, oh, because it's simple, it must be easy or cheap, right? So I think like your explanation is actually it. And Prabhupada gives that same explanation in his purport. According to the context, which is something that Tukaram Prabhu really nails on every class. It's like we have to take into consideration context, what's going on, the thread of continuity. So we avoid taking things out of context and twisting it up. A lot of times, yeah, there's so many verses that could just stand alone, and they do, because it's absolute truth. So there's always an explanation, but it's just so much better to stay so chaste, like really chaste to the text for our own good, and also just so we are logical in our explanation. So to answer this question, which Kim did, the context shows that the independence that Krishna's talking about in this verse, we just came from talking about from him explaining what action is and how the soul gets entangled in this body, or in materialism through the body and through action, and how by the cultivation of knowledge and detachment, the soul is still engaging with the material world, but it's not gaining positive or negative results, because he is working for a higher purpose and understands that Krishna is actually above it all. And so at a certain point, which is certainly what Prabhupada drives at every moment that he gets, every chance, is Krishna consciousness. Even though we're just starting to go into theism, yeah, that's the goal of it all. So for us to become devotees, for us to come closer to that goal, we are nurturing that dependence on the Supreme. And so dependence on the Supreme means that we become more independent from anything else that entangles us or keeps us bound to the material world. Now, I think something that we need to watch out for is the fact that we don't want to then become too focused on that duality. It's like God is good, and then this material world is so bad, and everything else in it, it's bad, and we must condemn it, and we must get out of here. And and so it's really important to keep the context, because Krishna here is harmonizing. He's not telling Arjuna, hey, yeah, good idea, go retire to the forest and just meditate on me. I mean, we're super tight, I'm gonna take you back home anyway. You don't have to do anything. No, we see how Krishna is telling Arjuna, do your duty, you're a soldier. If you don't do it, you're gonna end up doing it for the wrong reasons anyway. And so we see how Krishna is actually telling Arjuna, no, you should act. Karma's, that's your duty. You're in this world, you need to act. But there's a way to do it perfectly. So in this way, when we connect the verses and we stay chaste to the context and to Krishna's words, we really don't have any room to twist things up, either knowingly or unknowingly. Or if somebody asks, somebody that like loves independence, and it's like, okay, this is great, Krishna's saying we should be independent, so why should I even believe in a organized religion if I should be independent? So here we see how everything's so like foolproof, right? Independent from materialism, but at the same time we're nurturing detachment from materialism, which means that we have to be attached to something else, which is spirituality. And how we have been reading through the previous chapters, little by little, one thing will connect you to another, and eventually that will connect us to the source. But here, Prabhupada is making that jump of the devotee is always 100% dependent on Krishna. So there's no anxiety, there's no fear, there's no link to reactions or stress. And this is beautifully explained in the purport. So dive into that if needed.
Thank you guys both for shedding light on this point. And as I was listening to you guys talking, a verse came to my mind, which I believe reinforces you guys' explanation, which is when Krishna says that a man is forced to act according to the qualities he has acquired from the modes of material nature. So we are forced to act in that particular way unless you have attained true knowledge of self and Krishna. And then now you're no longer forced to act according to material nature because you have gained your independence from it, right? So
Right.
you are independent now from having to act according to the way the material nature would force you to. You became independent from that. So I'm linking that text to you guys' explanation, and I'm thinking that it all makes sense.
Sounds good. I'm glad that I brought that up because actually every time I read this verse, I'm like, independence? What? We should, like, somebody needs to talk about this. Even during class when Prabhu brought it up, I really wanted to raise my hand and be like, well, that doesn't make sense. How can we be independent if like, and so, yeah, thinking about it, it's I think it's something that will come up for some people or a lot of people. And so it's important to problematize it and then resolve it, right?
Right.
And so that,
even our relationship with dependence or independence, depending on what your personal history is, like when you were describing it so beautifully, Rangi, about, oh, when we're more dependent on Krishna, we have less fear and less anxiety. And I thought, oh, well, just the word dependence makes me have more, I don't know if anxiety is the right word, but more
fear, yeah.
Yeah, like I don't want to be dependent on anything. I can't depend on anything, but that's just it. Like we can depend on Christian. So just the way you describe that, where dependence can actually be a positive experience, and is interesting.
It's so true, and I'm so glad you bring this up because we have been jaded. I think that's something that we should all recognize. By living in materialism, we have been so jaded because we wanted to be here and enjoy and be like God and all these things. Yeah, ultimately we can trace it back to us, but still that doesn't take away the heartbreak and all the suffering we've been through. And so it's really hard to believe that there's actually somebody out there that we can trust, that there's actually somebody out there that's not looking out for themselves, but they're looking out for us, and that they actually want to have a truthful and loving and reciprocating relationship with us, and that they're actually our best friend. Because we've been in the material world where everybody's just looking out for themselves, what they can get from us, and we are thinking the same way. How can I exploit you? How can I get something out of you? And so we've been jaded, and we've been kind of like, abused. We've abused ourselves, and we've abused other people, and we've been abused. So it's natural to come across these things and be like, wait a minute. Our teachers actually encourage us to use our logic and our our mind, our intelligence to ask questions, because that relationship with the Supreme is not going to be automatic. You have to gain trust. And the only way you're going to do that, just like any other relationship, like I wouldn't trust you guys if I had just met you, but because we've been through a lot and time has gone by and you have been there for me when I needed you, and I have hopefully been there for you when you needed. And so that trust and love and closeness and intimacy builds over time. And so it's the same thing with the Supreme. The only thing is that we think, oh, is he going to go away? Is he really there? But really, we are the X factor. We're the ones that are always one foot in and the other one out with plan B, C, D, E, F, And so when we think about it that way, it's like, oh, okay, it's easier to be kinder to ourselves, but at the same time, know that that relationship with Krishna is not going to come automatically. And if it does, it's blind faith. And so that's a red flag. And so it's natural, it's organic to build it up through time and the right way. And how is the right way to do it is we're going through the Gita systematically. Krishna is teaching us how to develop our relationship with him through the Gita, like by talking with him, hearing him, asking questions, thinking about it, meditating on it, talking with other practitioners about it. That's developing a relationship, like a solid relationship where you're not blind following and blind doubting, right? Because your questions are being answered. And so I just wanted to bring that up because, it doesn't happen overnight. And if it does, then you should be suspicious of blind faith. And if you've been through this for so long and you still have some doubt, maybe you're just a victim of blind doubt too. Mm-hmm. So it's a relationship like any other, but it does require time and effort and your part and all these things. And also realizing that we have been through the ringer and we have some issues and hangups that we need to work through in order for this knowledge to actually seep deep. Yeah, I felt like I needed to bring this up because it was something that I struggled with a lot at the beginning, like trust issues and stuff, and just opening up to somebody that I can't really touch and feel every day. It's even harder and easier if I don't want to be very personal, but it's harder. And so it's something that through time it evolves and it becomes more tangible and real. And so, yeah, independence.
Yeah, I like how you liken it to a relationship, because that's one of the concepts in the beginning when I started coming to the temple was the idea that Krishna is a person. And so the way you related it, like how do you build a relationship with a person, especially the asking of questions. I like it that this tradition encourages questions, doesn't like blind faith.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Thank you guys. That was great. And
Cool.
so shall we go to 23, or is there anything else between 20 to 22 that we should cover?
I think quickly, well, 21 through 20 and 22 is just, I guess, like 21, what does that person look like? Like this person that Krishna is starting to describe, right? Well, that person is, he acts with mind and intelligence, perfectly controlled. So we see that, mind control is a part of the equation. He or she gives up all sense of proprietorship over his possessions. So he doesn't think this is all mine and for me and related to me, and this is my wife's and kids and my business. But he starts expanding that vision and realizes that he doesn't own anything. He's just passing through, and that there is actually a real proprietor, and acts only for the bare necessities of life. So just to keep body and soul together, like Tukram said, just whatever's necessary, you get that, and you live with that.
You know the word simple living and high thinking.
Exactly. And thus he's still working, right? Engaging in karma. He is not affected by negative reactions. So he just works for the bare necessities, doesn't try to accumulate more than what he needs. He has a controlled mind and therefore intelligence, and he doesn't think himself the proprietor. Then on verse 22, it's pretty much like the results of having that control mind. The result of having that control mind and not thinking of yourself the proprietor over things leads you to not having negative reactions for the work or for the actions that you do in this world. And he who is satisfied with gain, which comes from its own accord. I thought that was really important to mention because I know it's something that hit everybody in the audience hard, was that part that if you're satisfied with what comes without too much over-endeavoring, that's what it means, too much endeavor. So without too much endeavor, and you're satisfied with that, and that person who is free from duality and does not envy, and who is steady in both success and failure, is never entangled, even though he's still performing stuff. So we see here, we get a glimpse of what that mentality of that yogi looks like. He's still engaging in the world, but he's satisfied, even if he loses or wins sometimes, even if he has a goal in mind and puts in enough effort, he's satisfied with whatever comes from that, because he's doing his part. He's not over endeavoring, trying to make it fit into his own plans. He kind of is, you get an imagery of somebody that's like, yeah, he goes to work and he does his thing, but he's not so overly attached or broken if something doesn't go his way. He's always open for Krishna to come and do his part, and he's like satisfied with that. Yeah, and that's 22. So
this description of this person brings me to clarity in regards to exactly how it is to be a self-realized person. Because this statement here by Krishna that we are satisfied with whatever comes of its own accord. Like, who lives that way if not a self-realized person? Because I keep on trying to go behind these facts and understand but what it is that leads me to feel satisfied with what comes of its own accord. Nobody feels that way in material life, right? If you always want more of the things that you're attached to, or you want less of the things that hurt you. So who is the person that can be satisfied with whatever comes of its own accord? Only the person who has realized what Krishna has been trying to tell Arjuna, starting on chapter 3 and up to now, that look, we are part of a much greater reality. And the reactions that I am getting, they are coming from that much greater reality. And it is what it is. So whatever comes, I'm satisfied with that because I understand I am a part of a much greater reality, and I'm not trying to fight against that point in which I live. So only if I have that understanding, that practical realization, I could be satisfied with whatever comes of its own accord. So he continues to highlight Krishna's brilliance and how every point he's making is connected to the greater theme, to the greater teaching that he's taking Arjuna through. And we can continue to extrapolate all these meanings from even statements like this, which could go undetected. So yeah, it's very nice.
Thank you. I really like how you pointed it out in such simple terms. Like, we're always trying to get more of what feels good and what we want, and we're always trying to feel less pain or get rid of the things that don't feel good or don't make us happy. And it's such a clean way to explain or describe materialism. And in spiritual life, it's like a spiritualist is not trying to break even. He sees everything as a lesson.
Right.
So there's no like anxiety and fear and resentment and anger and envy. Envy is brought up in this text, in this verse, and that's huge. So I really appreciated you kind of putting it in such simple terms.
Right. I was listening to a lecture, one of my guru's lecture this past week. It's extremely powerful verse from Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, 3rd chapter, text 33, where Shukadev Goswami there says that the sign of real self-realization is how much a person has become indifferent to the needs of both the gross and the subtle bodies, you know? And it connects to me directly to this. So the gross body, the physicality of our biology, right? And the subtle body being the mind, intelligence, false ego. So how much indifferent, to the extent that I am indifferent to the demands of the gross and subtle body, to that degree, I am self-realized. Because the less self-realized I am, knowing that I am the soul, the more attention I am going to play to the more attention I'm going to pay to the demands of my gross and subtle body. So if I'm more indifferent to that, to me, it's directly connected to this verse. I am happy and satisfied with whatever comes, and I am indifferent to my gross and subtle mind, because I am self-realized, because I have this knowledge that Krishna is giving me. And we can see how we can be talking about these concepts, which sounds very esoteric, spiritual, etc. And they could be somewhat out there, meaning, yes, it's cool for us to talk about these topics on a weekend or when we are relatively at peace and feeling good. But no, these verses to me, they have a way to bring it so practical, because if you really grasp this knowledge, it can alleviate our sufferings and our hang-ups in material life at every point. Because no matter which, like chapter 2, first teaching, we are not this body, we are spiritual souls. And if we are a spiritualist in a journey to self-realization, and we come across a bona fide spiritual tradition, This will be lesson number one. We are not these bodies. We are spiritual souls. And then a year goes by, 2 years, 3 years, 10 years.
We go on vacation.
We go to other so-called more philosophical points and more complex points, but we haven't truly internalized this one basic and simple point yet, that all of my sufferings, all of my attachments that leads me to my hang-ups in material life is only due to me trying to satisfy my gross and subtle bodies. Like even what we are recently talking about, Black Lives Matters, with what happens with Black people protesting. I'm blanking on his name again.
Oh, George Floyd?
George Floyd. So again, if I am thinking I'm Black, then I'm going to be super attached to this. If I'm thinking I'm the body and I'm the mind, I'm going to be attached to so many things of the world. But the more indifferent I become to this is a sign that I am now paying more attention to who I truly am, which is an eternal spiritual soul. And indifference and detached, I think we covered this in a previous podcast as well. Not to say that we don't care, that we can care less about George Floyd being treated in such a terrible, pitiful way, and that there should be no police reform. Not that we are detached to that extent that we don't care, but because we are doing our duties, right? Krishna is telling Arjuna, no, you go and fight, you handle the intricacies of this world. But you're not it. You're not the body, you're not the mind, you're something above and beyond. So these things can be practical at every level of our existence here on planet Earth. It is not just a hypothetical philosophical teaching that maybe when I'm older, I can reap the benefits of it and hopefully become wise at that point. Even now, these points can be very relevant and very valuable in our lives at all times.
Totally. Yeah.
Yes. So,
I agree. Before we move on, I do want to bring something up that Tukram brought up about text 22, which I thought was brilliant, which is that here we see how Krishna is talking about a tradition that is not discriminating against other traditions, and it's not segregating or excluding a people, but it's really focusing on that this tradition is based on what group. It's not based on what group you're a part of, or like what religion you belong to, or what race you are, or whatever, but it's really based on you as a spiritual being, which really transcends races and cultures and religious names and stuff. How you as a spiritual being can gain freedom from materialism. And so it can start from the gross part of it, right? Getting over certain things that are really obvious, like, I don't know, being racist or being greedy and wanting to be the best one and being righteous and thinking like your way is the only way and things like that, to more subtle lessons or way of practicing your spirituality, which is your mental state, you know, how you're seeing other people, how you're seeing the circumstances, how satisfied you are with what comes up from its own of its own accord, how you're acting when nobody's looking, your integrity. And so I thought that was really wonderful, because we really see here how Krishna is just so universal. Krishna consciousness is so universal. It's not talking about only for Hindus, like if you do this, then you're going to make advancement. It's really not talking about what type of group you belong to, but rather what you need to be looking out for. Like, what are those demons that are attacking you and that are making it harder for you to become self-realized? And I thought that was something that I would have not picked up on my own from reading these verses, but or this chunk, and I appreciated that, because yeah, what I haven't encountered another tradition that says, hey, just focus on these things and these things will help you progress. And it's not letting you, it's not prefacing, is that how you say it? Prefacing that teaching with, if you're a Christian or if you belong to this political party, then, you know, so it's just open and it's so universal, and it really disarms anybody that's like wanting to put anybody else down, because we realized, and he was explaining this during class, we realized that how much we still have to go, and that's how we protect ourselves from becoming self-righteous. It's like you understand, oh yeah, I conquered those things, but I still have these things to conquer. And so because of that vision of being able to see where you came from, what you struggled with so much, and how you're still struggling with other things, but you have overcome these, you're simultaneously feeling encouraged, but at the same time humbled. And so when somebody else comes along with some of those bigger or grosser demons, personality-wise or mentally and psychologically, we're able to lend a hand in a compassionate way, as opposed to a self-righteous way, which is something that we see so much of nowadays from other religions, or even just different groups in society, different types of people. And I thought that was really cool. It just gave me another thing to be grateful for in this tradition. And so, yeah, I just wanted to bring that up because it was something that I wouldn't have been able to pick up on my own. So I appreciated him pointing that out.
That's a very interesting point, and I think it's also a perfect segue into the verses that are to come, starting on 23. And we did cover quite a few texts on the past Friday, and took around, bundle them all together with an overall teaching of all these verses being put together, which I do believe is a segue from what you're talking about, Varangi. Before getting into that, I think it would be worthwhile getting context of what, starting from verse 23, what we're really talking about for our audience who may not be so familiar with the differences between East and Western theological or spiritual thought. So I'll introduce this topic briefly. In the West, we have three predominant religions: Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And these traditions are, I guess I keep on saying tribal, and I just want to mention again that is not due to any condescending meaning, but it's just really the genesis of these traditions. They were at the tail of leaving polytheism away and embracing monotheism, but still a monotheism from the way the Jews looked at it, then from the way that the Christians looked at it, then the way that the Muslims looked at it, and they were exclusive, right? So then it's like my tribe versus your tribe. And there are many theological issues that come about from by looking at religion that way, because obviously my God is going to be better than your God. So those are the challenges that we face in the West in terms of religious thoughts. Like, why can't everybody just get along and be together? Because it comes from the mentality, my God versus your God. In the East, it's more harmonized, meaning people accept that we pretty much have the exact same goals, which is to get rid of the clutches of material nature and go back to our eternal existence as spiritual souls in a realm which is transcendental to this materialism. So that basic thought is pretty much accepted within all of Eastern spiritual traditions. The differences in the philosophical arguments are related to what happens to you when you achieve perfection by following the specific paths, the different paths from Eastern traditions. The most predominant of such philosophical difference is that either A, again, in answering the question, what happens to you when you achieve perfection? The different possibilities are either A, you become one with God. There is no difference between you or God. It's homogenized and absolutely oneness. you become God. The best example here is if we imagine if it's raining and there are many individual drops of water, but at one point the rain will fall in the individual drops of water will fall in the ocean. So what happens to that individual drop of water when it touches the ocean? It loses its individuality and it becomes the ocean. There is no more separate drop of rain and the ocean. It's just separate things, even though they're both water and have that communality. Now that they have merged, there is the individual drop of water is gone and everything is the ocean. So that's the oneness, the absolute oneness. The other possibility of what happens to you when you achieve perfection is that you always exist, you continue to exist, except that now you exist with or observed by the supreme person, which is Krishna. And love is the force that unites both you and the supreme soul. But you always exist as an individual, and God maintains his individuality. You maintain your individuality in an eternal loving relationship, and love is the bounding force between you and Krishna. So there are a lot of philosophical arguments whether the absolute oneness is the ultimate truth or the eternal individuality from the platform of love is the ultimate reality. And starting on text 23, which was beginning of class this past Friday, Tukaram was really reading it from the Sanskrit perspective. So Prabhupada here, being such a wonderful Vaishnava, he's translating things in a way that will make complete and absolute sense by the end of Gita. But at this point here, he is again translating ahead, right? So he's not mistranslating, but he's translating ahead. If we look at the Sanskrit, the way Tukaram took us in class, that can be a reading that points towards this absolute oneness. And the teaching that he was giving us is that us as devotees of the Gita, we should be comfortable with this potential oneness and how to understand it. So the text itself reads, the work of a man who is unattached to the modes of material nature and who is fully situated in transcendental knowledge. No, actually, this is 24 that I taught. So I'm going to read text 24, actually. A person who is fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness is sure to attain the spiritual kingdom because of his full contribution to spiritual activities, in which the consummation is absolute, and that which is offered is of the same spiritual nature. So from Sanskrit, this text is saying that the person who is offering, who is making this offering is Brahman. The offering itself is Brahman, and we're offering these things to Brahman, and the results of these actions is that you attain Brahman. So that really points to this oneness, that everything is Brahman. And Brahman is a word that is oftentimes used for Krishna, to refer to Krishna, God. So then here this verse is saying, hey, whoever is offering, whatever you're offering, the act of offering itself and the results of having offered is all Brahman. So how is that not this absolute oneness, which us devotees of Krishna would feel a little bit skeptical by, because now it seems like everything is just Brahman, everything is Krishna. I am Krishna, I'm offering things into Krishna, and having done that perfectly, then I attain Krishna and I become Krishna, right? And Tukaram's way of troubleshooting this, or actually explaining this for our understanding, is that we are comfortable saying that this oneness exists. Obviously, our views is that we are eternally an individual soul and that we will love Krishna forever in our perfect states of existence. And we would reject the idea that we are, the perfection of our endeavors is absolute oneness with Krishna. So the way that we understand this is that Krishna says, everything emanates from me. Everything comes from Krishna. We spoke about this, that Krishna is the cause of all causes, that from which everything comes. So in that sense, everything that exists, everything that we can possibly conceive of, has one thread of continuity, has one thing in common, which is our exact same source. We all come from Krishna. So the fire is Krishna's energy. The intelligence that guides me through the actions of offering, let's say, for example, ghee into the fire, which is a traditional Vedic sacrifice, that knowledge comes from Krishna. The idea that I am becoming aware of something greater than myself, that idea came from Krishna to me. That something which is greater than myself is also Krishna's energy. Everything comes from Krishna. So in that sense, we are all one, but not in the absolute sense that we lose our individuality. Tukaram gave a great example about this. His surname is Garvey, right? And there are there's his wife, there are his kids, and they're all Garveys. But it's not the case that if Tukaram the Garvey, let's say, took a shower at 7 o'clock, which is actually the example he gave, right? It doesn't mean that his son or his daughters took a shower at 7 in the morning. No, that was Tukaram the father, but then there's also the other Garvey here, who is an individual, is separate from him. So simultaneously, we are sharing this oneness. We are all part of Krishna. So in that sense, we are all one. But nevertheless, we are still individuals. So it seems to me that the subsequent verses, and this is the segue that I mentioned, Varangi, from what you said, that we are not exclusivists, but that we are embracing Krishna's teachings to be universal. We are not the only possessors of the truth. Everybody can read from this and benefit. And we are not exclusivists. It seems to me that the subsequent verses here is Krishna trying to harmonize the different ways of sacrifices. According to Krishna here, this sacrifice, the idea that do your duty and don't be attached to the results, doing our duty is not always pleasant. We do our duty because we understand is our higher calling. We're doing our duty because of a higher principle. And Krishna in the subsequent verses here, as Tukaram explained to us, is really going to dig into all different kinds of ways, different paths, whether you're a brahmachari or a sage or a yogi or a householder, we share this same thread of continuity, which is we accept that there's something that is higher than ourselves, and we act in this with this mindset of austerities and sacrifice. We are giving up something material in order to attain something higher, which is something that is spiritual. And in that sense, I saw a connection between the point you're making, Varangi, and this subsequent test, because Krishna is still doing that, showing that, hey, there is a oneness. There is a oneness in our existence. There is a oneness in our understanding. But yet there is room for different people to be doing things in a slightly different way. Like the brahmacharis here, Krishna is mentioning, their sacrifice is the hearing process. They neglect hearing things of the world from people that are not seriously pursuing spiritual life, but instead they are hearing mainly and primarily from their gurus. So in that sense, they are sacrificing their hearing process. And so on, different people, different spiritualists who have read the Vedas and understood it from a slightly different way, there's room for that. But at the same time, there's that thread of continuity where they all share the realization that there's something above us, much higher than us, and that we are sacrificing our material existence for that higher spiritual reality. And that they all share in common. So I thought it was very powerful to see that, which again is directly connected to the point you made. There is no exclusivism here. There is the same point that we are all aiming to attain something higher than ourselves, which is spiritual. But yeah, people are doing things in different ways, and Krishna is acknowledging that and saying, yes, those things are all bona fide ways in which you can attain higher spiritual consciousness. And yet there's a thread of continuity between them all as well. So I just want to bring that up. I don't know if we will have time to cover all the subsequent texts where Krishna is highlighting the different spiritual practices, but I just want to perhaps then introduce this topic, that there's always this Vaishnava way of always being in the middle, neither too much on the left nor too much on the right. Not to say that there's only one way, there are many ways, but even though in these many ways, there is this unique bona fide way that all attain at the end of the day. And Krishna is a part of it all.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I thought it was a great connection to that, to the point of, how this tradition is so universal, and also the introduction to that next chunk that we covered last class, which I thought myself, I just learned so much. Tukram has just explained to us about the different schools of thought, ancient, schools of thought, all based on the Vedas, and how we could relate that even to now, how, what most people focus on is in seeing how we're different. Oh, this is our differences. And we hear how, here, in this chunk of the Gita, how Krishna is actually, he's such a revolutionary, he's just like, actually, let me tell you all how you're all connected. And by doing this, he's honoring all these different traditions by pointing out that thread of continuity, which you so expertly explained, how they're all hopefully doing all these things for a higher purpose, to transcend materialism and to eventually, come into that understanding that we are actually the eternal servants of God, and that's the ultimate goal in life. I particularly appreciated, and I highly recommend all the listeners, to tap into the class itself, which will be linked in the description, for you to get all the details, because this is something that is just one of the multitude of qualities that Tukram has. He just has so much knowledge about all the different groups and sects and schools of thought, and what they're called and what they specialize in, and how they all tie in, and how our Bhakti Vedanta, how our knowledge of Bhakti came in to sew them all together, which obviously our representative is Krishna, and he's so actually doing this. And so I'm not qualified I haven't learned it enough to explain it in my own words, but from that last class, it was the first time that I finally was able to understand how under one umbrella of tradition, there are different sects or different traditions focusing on different ways in which to achieve spiritual realization, and how our tradition is actually so unique because we are honoring all these wonderful components of different traditions by pointing out how we're all connected and what the purpose of life is, and what all those practitioners are working towards. And I thought that was really awesome. Specifically about text 24, something that Tukram explained that really blew my mind. And this is only for those of you that are really into, studying like the little intricate words or reasons why something cannot make sense logically. So he was talking about how this verse actually cannot point to absolute monism, because we're talking about different actions. So grammatically, the way that this verse is composed, if you are Brahman and you're doing this thing to become Brahman, that just means that you're actually not absolutely Brahman, because then you wouldn't need to do any of this, because you would already be that which you're trying to achieve. So grammatically, that would just mean, yeah, you have some quality of it, and you're engaging in this process to perfect that state. And also, you couldn't, if you are all one, you couldn't actually offer yourself to yourself in that. So I specifically enjoyed hearing this explanations, because when I first read this text, not first like 10 years ago, but like first before class on Friday, I was like, oh my gosh, this is one of those texts that sounds really like neo-spiritualist, like we're all one, yeah, fly with the fairies and you'll become a fairy and we're all happy, like kind of like that. It's just like, and so when I read this, I was like, it doesn't make sense. What do you mean that I am this and I become that, and then also the thing that I'm offering into, I'm also that? Like, what? It sounds weird, and not like it sounds all one. It just didn't make sense to me. So to hear it in such an expert way, the way he explained it, and that you summarized it so well, it did two things to me. It made me realize that there is a limit to my own understanding on my own, right? And that, yes, that will expand the more that we hear from other people that have seen the truth and can walk us through it. But also that, again, putting it into context. If I just read this verse on its own, which is what I did, I was like, this doesn't make any sense. But if we're tying it into everything else, like you did, you tied it into that last verse, we're able to understand what Krishna is doing. He's just continuing to connect one thing to another and expounding it and fleshing it out in deeper ways. And so this verse was beautiful to see that thread of continuity, which was, yes, we all are spiritual, even the things that are in this world. And although they may seem material, they're actually spiritual, a spirit misunderstood, which is something that Tukram has explained before. So it's not that it's separate. We're all qualitatively one with Krishna, but we're quantitatively different. And when he mentioned that, I was like, oh yeah, how did I miss that? I mean, it's one of the ABCs. And it's so true when you pointed out, like, you know, at a certain point, we grow into analyzing deeper topics, and then we forget. Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can.
Oh, okay. And then we forget about the ABCs. It's so important to be able to stay connected to that foundation. Anyway, that was all. I know there's like 10 more verses, but
I really appreciate you bringing up the grammar aspect, because that was a really powerful point too, of how you are Brahman, you're becoming Brahman. So it's kind of the argument of the impersonal versus a personal deity. Is like, if we're all striving to become one again, how did we become individualized? Which I haven't ever heard a very good argument for. So this is kind of along those same lines, that, yeah, the Gita is not teaching about absolute oneness. So I thought it was really interesting how Tukram was pointing out how we need to be open to a more fluid conversation about it, and not so, you know, like you said, strict about it. No, it's this way, because that's what Krishna was doing, trying to explain that.
You know, when we start discussing these topics, two things comes to my mind. Number one is that what really attracted, I think, us all about Krishna consciousness is a scientific method. And as such, there is no other way but to get into it, right? It's science. It's science, it's philosophy. Let's dig into these topics. Let's understand what they mean, because the results, which is our spiritual knowledge evolving, is for our greatest benefits. And there's a lot of people that are turned off by religion nowadays, are very attracted to the spiritual concept. And so much of the spiritual, neo-spiritualism, right? They're connected by this thought, oh, we are all one. And it's beautiful. It's beautiful to acknowledge that, because racism would fall away, discrimination of any kind would fall away, or even meat eating would fall away. Because if we are all one, then I'm not going to murder my fellow ones, mates, an animal. Right? So it's really beautiful. It's a beautiful concept, and you could bring so much goodness into the world. But it is nevertheless a little bit abstract. Or like, what does it mean we are all one? Right? Like, am I really you and you're really me? And a lot of people do say that. A lot of gurus that came from India in the 60s especially, they do postulate this teaching. And the scientific approach of Prabhupada and Krishna Consciousness and Gaudiya Vaishnavism at large, for that matter, I appreciate this so much, because when we dig into this oneness, again, like we just covered, there's a lot of room to appreciate that. We are all spiritual souls. We have the same nature. Our same nature is Krishna. The entire world is Krishna's energy. So in that sense, everything is one, because we have the common source, which is Krishna. But then to not stop there, like, where does it take us, right? To not stop there and say, but however, ultimately and eternally, we don't lose our individuality. We are one in our unique way. So there's that adding touch, the finishing touch that we've been given that I truly appreciate, which is the finishing touch that really allows for love and bhakti to exist. You mentioned Bhaktivedanta, which is a topic, a title that I love, Varangi. Vedanta is really the attempt to harmonize all these thoughts and all these different paths philosophically. And Bhakti is what transpires eternally. So Bhaktivedanta put together is like as a wonderful concept. So I appreciate this completeness, the scientific, philosophical, theological approach of how Krishna Consciousness gives us spiritual insights, because it really turns all stones and enhances our knowledge. We are all one. I can have that conversation with a neo-spiritualist, but then it doesn't end there. But I know that I'm also still an eternal individual in my perfectional state of bhakti, right? So I really appreciate that. The other point that comes to my mind when we were discussing these things is Krishna's loving kindness. To what extent he's going to teach his beloved friend, who is Arjuna, a lesson. Like, Krishna is surveying such a vast amount of topics. He's going over the entire Vedic literature, many, many different cultures, spiritual cultures that have existed prior to him, to them, right? Krishna and Arjuna. And Krishna is going in so many details, in so many ways, in so many aspects, and so carefully describing all these intricacies to Arjuna, so that Arjuna can have an understanding and evolve and get out of his predicaments that he was faced with in the beginning of Bhagavad Gita. So, you know, like, in our limited intelligence and knowledge, but also compassion and love that we have for people we know, we want to sit there and help people when they are in need. Like Varangi, you pointed out, that's how a true relationship is built and developed over the years. I'm there for you when you need me, and you're there for me when I need you. And like you said, hopefully I am there with something of value to give you when you are in need. That would be a great friend. So then when I think about Krishna that way, he is the ultimate knower of everything. And he's taking such an amazing perspective of everything with so much care, with so much love, and summarizing it all and explaining to Arjuna all this. He has so much knowledge. Not only he's there to help Arjuna as a friend would, but he actually is the supreme person. Like, we are attracted by people that help us in our difficult times, and we develop love for them. Well, think about Krishna that way. He is actually the possessor of all knowledge. He's actually the all-loving being, and he's demonstrating that here. He's taking so many different paths, so many different teachings, and putting it all together for Arjuna's benefit. Like, he's touching so many different points of Vedanta and Vedas and different personalities and how they act and what happened to them, all in an attempt to help his beloved friend Arjuna navigate a difficult situation. And those things just melts my heart, because Krishna is doing that for Arjuna like he would for me and anybody else who is willing to listen to him.
I'm muted. And I was saying, yeah, it's so beautiful because we also see that like our teachers imbibing that same mood. You know, they just go through such great lengths to give us all this knowledge. Like the fact that Tukram shows up every week, no matter what's going on, just to
And you know
give
what?
us.
I'm sorry, I have to
Go
interrupt.
ahead. Yes.
Not only he shows up every week, every Friday, for like we've been saying, right? We've been doing this for 10, 13 years, whatever. Well, he was doing this 10, 13 years before our 10, 13 years started, you know? And he's still there showing up. But the point that I wanted to add, I had this conversation just yesterday, actually. Not only he shows up and prepared with so much knowledge, but he shows up with enthusiasm and energy. Because, you know, it's one thing to be like, yeah, okay, guys, you know, I know Gita in and out, backwards and forward, you know, and I know everything, and I'm going to teach you guys because you guys don't know it yet, and I'm going to be patient, and I'm going to be tolerant, and I'm going to be teaching you guys all this. Not that. He's excited. He shows up with enthusiasm. He gets into it, like even bodily, right? He started like turning his legs. Okay, so, and then gets his dhoti this way, gets his dhoti that way, like, and then the energy flows, and then the enthusiasm flows. And to me, it's exactly the point that I am making. You know, that Krishna shows up that way, Tukram is showing up that way with enthusiasm. It's the showing their love for us. They're doing that for our benefit. So please continue.
I love this point of enthusiasm because our teacher says this so much. Like, one of the ways that you can protect your spiritual life is by staying enthusiastic. And I used to think, oh, these people show up enthusiastically because they like have a pep talk with themselves in front of the mirror right before they come down to give class, you know? And then the more I study and the more I do my practice, enthusiasm is actually embedded into these practices. So you're going to get that if you're doing things correctly. You can't separate enthusiasm from spiritual advancement. And that's one of the qualities of real spiritualists, that they're always enthusiastic, regardless of their bodily situations. One of our teachers, super famous in our community, Jayapataka Maharaj, he suffered from crazy stroke. Half of his body's paralyzed, so much pain. Just to even speak, what's to speak of eating and moving, and he requires a lot of attention and help. He is the most enthusiastic speaker. He sits down and it's like his body, I mean, it's apparent that it's not working as it was working before the stroke, but everything he's saying, his enthusiasm, his mood, his love, his grace, his spiritual strength is as amazing as ever before. And it just keeps increasing. And so when you see somebody of that spiritual stature, you know, that is undergoing so many physical obstacles, and then you compare somebody so great to an ordinary person, myself, that I complain and my whole day is shot if like I hurt my toe or I get a paper cut. It's just kind of like so obvious and it hurts. And it's like, I can't write properly. It's just like, it's so beautiful to see the real power and transformation of spirituality done right. You know, when you can't separate them. And so what you're saying is so true and it's so valuable. And I'm so glad you interrupted me because it's like so helpful. Enthusiasm is just something that you're going to get, and it's just going to ever increase if you're doing this process right. It doesn't matter if you're so tired, if you don't have any money, if you're hungry. Once you start talking about spiritual things, like real truth, there's no end to it because it's spiritual. And so we're speaking and studying and using all these technology stuff in the way that in the most perfect of ways. Therefore, there's an endless flow of enthusiasm and you just feel so satisfied and happy. And I'm sure both of you experience this daily. But even if you're just starting out in your spiritual life, I think that's when you experience it the most. You're like, and you feel like you're self-realized because your whole life is transformed. And then you have to work on some things in order to keep up the enthusiasm. And then at a certain point, you kind of get it down and enthusiasm just flows. But yeah, enthusiasm is so key. And we see that in our teachers, and we see that in Krishna. And so it's such a scientific method. You have to, yes, step into the lab to try it out, but also you can see it around you by the practitioners. They're actually walking their talk. And enthusiasm is one of those things that you can't really pretend. Or if you do it one day and then the next day you don't, it's like, okay, like you can tell. But for most practitioners, you know, you sit down and start hearing from them, and they're just so connected. And it doesn't matter what's going on around them. It doesn't matter if their body is working or not working. Nothing matters, because truth and love and grace and realization is flowing through their mouth. And so, you know, their words and actions, it's a package deal. So yeah, I love how you brought that up, that point. We see that in Krishna, and we see that in his followers. And hopefully, you know, that's what we're training for, to become. And of course you already are. But yeah, it's a nice meditation. It's like, oh yeah, that's where I'm headed. And we see how the Gita is actually in this way, in this structure. I don't know if this far, I don't know, we haven't gotten that much far in the Gita to be able to notice it, but it will come up even more regularly, how Krishna introduces a concept, defines it, and then gives an explanation of what it looks like so you can spot it. You know, so it's both teaching Arjuna and us how to develop it, but also how to spot it in others so we can get help in the process of developing it. It's like, that's a brilliant teaching concept and structure, you know?
I know we're running out of time, but I can't help but to do this. I saw too many parallels here, and I want to share. What you just said, Varangi, that Krishna teaches it, then he gives an example to illustrate that's how he actually transpires, right? Then you mentioned Maharaj Jayapataka Swami, who is an extraordinary personality. And then this text that we were discussing, how the sign of a true self-realized person is how indifferent they have become to the demands of their gross and subtle bodies, right? So I want to put these 3 points together. I can't help but to do this. So it is also a personal experience I had with Maharaj, right? Once, this was after his stroke, and he gave a lecture in Laguna Beach Temple. And he came, and I was present. So he came with great sacrifice, right? Because all his disciples are helping him walk and then helping him sit. And they are giving him with a straw something for him to drink. His body is really damaged from this stroke. And he's a little bit weak. You can see the way Maharaj is walking, you know, he really does need that help. If his disciples were to let him go, he would have probably fall. So he's very dependent in that way, right? So that's how he entered the temple. And then he gave lecture also with a lot of sacrifice, because the microphone has to be quite close to his mouth because he doesn't have that energy to speak out loud anymore. And it's also somewhat difficult to understand him. So he is making even a greater effort to speak.
Vocalize.
Yeah, so that we can understand, right? And he's making all this sacrifice for our benefit. He doesn't have to be there. For decades, he was such a pure devotee of Krishna. He would have all the rights to be like, okay, Krishna, I've done my duty. You now put me in this state, so I'm just going to sit here and relax a little bit. I'm still going to read Srimad Bhagavatam. I'm still going to chant, but I'm going to chill. You know, I'm going to sit here and be okay. And he's still traveling. He's still going all around the world. A side point here, I'm glorifying the devotee, so you might have to stop me at some point. A side point here is that he was on a Delta Airlines flight. This is like a major airline, right? And this is definitely prior COVID. And the captain of Delta Airlines announced that, ladies and gentlemen, we have on this flight, the #1 person in all of Delta Airlines for traveling miles, and it was Maharaj. Because it means that he has gotten in a Delta Airlines flight more than anybody on the planet. He has put in more miles flying around the world on a Delta Airlines flight than anybody else alive on the planet. And that's like, and he's still doing that, even with this tremendous bodily discomfort, you know? So that's like what you're saying, Varangi. Krishna, he explains it, he talks about it, and then he demonstrates, okay, that's like a person like that. That's what I'm talking about, right? So anyways, and I'm aware of all of this, and I'm feeling grateful that Maharaj is there, that I was able to attend his lecture and get his wisdom, but at the same time, a little compassionate because I want to do something to help him. Like, you know, like physically, I wish I could have been one of his disciples to like help him up and help him and help him walk outside, you know? So I was feeling that mixed emotion in my heart, that I'm happy to be here, but at the same time, I want to help him. Like, is there anything I can do for him to help him? I would do it in a heartbeat, you know? And then this most extraordinary thing happened to me. The lecture was over, and Maharaj stands up. All his disciples are there, help him, you know, get up with great difficulty. Everything takes a lot of time. And he's drinking and he's walking very slowly towards the exit from the temple, which is where I happen to be standing. And Maharaj came, and then he stopped when he was quite in front of me. And then he asked his disciples to like, you know, like turn him this way, which was kind of towards my way. And then he started walking, and I was kind of freaking out because it really seemed like he was walking towards me. And he was. And then he stops right in front of me, and then he does one of these. So then I go down to listen to what it is that he has to say. And with great difficulty, he whispers in my ear, he says the following: "Is there anything I can do for you?" And when I heard that from him, like my heart just completely broke, because in my mind and in my heart, I'm thinking, what can I do for you? You know? But like the text from Gita, he's so indifferent to his gross body or his mind or his subtle mind. He's so indifferent to what's going on to him, which would totally bewilder any one of us in that situation, in that circumstance. He's so indifferent to his body and to what happened to him that all that he was thinking is, how can I help that guy? Because
yeah,
help, right? Like, and then he comes and asks me that, like, what can I do to help him? And in my foolishness, I'm thinking, how can I help him? Because I'm only perceiving his physical difficulties, not understanding that he's actually in bliss. He's actually in the spiritual world of Krishna, even though he's on the planet Earth, you know? So I just wanted to kind of share this, you know, like how indifferent he became to his body, like the example that Krishna talks about and is right there for us to see. And now he's still enthusiastic. He's still flying around the world. He's still preaching, even amidst this great difficulty of his body, you know? So it's amazing. So I need to share that.
Thank you for sharing it. It's like, it just keeps adding to, I have great love and respect for Maharaj. So I love to hear stories and mystical encounters with him, because I've had quite a few as well. And so thank you for sharing.
Yes, my pleasure.
All right. Well, we are out of time, I think, but I'm so glad we extended it. And thank you so much for contributing that personal story today. I really love that. Yeah, and I appreciate both of you because, you know, I listen to the lectures, I replay them, you know, taking notes, and then I come to this episode that we're recording, and I learn so much more again from you guys and your realizations. So I appreciate your enthusiasm, both of you, because it's very contagious.
Mutual.
So yeah. All right. Well, we will get into how Krishna expands on these topics next week. And thank you everyone for joining, and we'll see you again soon.
Hare Krishna.